So, my name's Julia Jones. I am from a company called Found in Music, and I have a particular interest in age because, for very many reasons, we work with primary schools with an organisation called Young Voices. I'm the chair of Young Voices that does concerts, and we also work with care homes and every age in between. So this panel is actually about under 18s, and I'm just going to, before going down the line here, we've got quite a lot of excellent people on the panel, so we want to try and keep it swift and get as much wisdom as possible from their own experiences. But something that happened this week, I was with some property developers, and we were talking about shopping centres. And I said, well, surely shopping centres are, that they've got a limited lifespan now with people shopping online. And so, what's the long-term future when you're looking at trying to invest significant amounts of money into shopping centres? And he said, on the contrary, because shopping centres are the destination for teenagers, and they've been doing a lot of research into the footfall into centres, and not just Westfield style, but all over the UK. And I thought it was really interesting, the conversation that we had about that, around they want to become that destination, that social destination. So when also there's a lot of research around something called the reminiscence bump, and the influence of your teenage experiences in particular, and especially around music, have a lifelong effect. And that's why a lot of the music and dementia work we do, when you've got people who are absolutely shut down in terms of communication, you can go in, you can reach them with music that they've grown up with. So it's apart from being a really interesting and important audience for venues to tap into, there are other significant reasons why we should be looking at the under 18 audience. So enough of blurb from me. We're going to just go down the line. I've been told that we're not doing introductions because it's all in the app and it's all in the book. So it's more about just some insights initially into any experiences of targeting this under 18 audience. So, Tim, do you want to?
I was interested in this panel because I don't know what other venues, but in the past few years, the crowds that come to our venues have really gone down in age significantly. Maybe it's just a geographic blip or a location or something like that, but it's been quite interesting where, I think maybe the perception is that young people don't go out to gigs anymore. We found the opposite effect. Maybe that's just, as I said, geographical or circumstance or whatever, I don't know, but it's actually happened. And when I was thinking about this, I sort of broke the age group down into 3 different sectors. This sort of 18-ish sector, which what we find is when you've got young bands playing, you're going to get, their peers and whatever coming out to those gigs. And one thing I'd say about that is you got to treat those bands like properly. If they're, don't use them as fodder of opening up a show, whatever. Pay them properly, look after them properly, and you get good returns on it whenever they stop being headliners or whatever, and then coming back after they've been signed. So I think that's really important. The sort of 17-ish, 18-ish year old bands, that's very important to look after them and treat them very well. The second group would be 14 to 18, and I'm unfortunately not got an awful lot to say on this because the location of where I work is pretty residential, and we've had trouble with the council before about dispersal and stuff like that, and it's a problem that'd be pretty hard to overcome unless we'd got like sort of, several security down the street or whatever, just because we get neighbour complaints, and it's a bit of a not just that age, but it would be something that residents would use to complain to the council about. It would just be another thing that, you know, they could say, oh, look, and they're underage or whatever, or just in the same way that they say, oh, we found like sort of drug paraphernalia or whatever and blame it on the venue. And it would just be something for them to like sort of whack us over the head with. So that's a problem. And I was speaking to like a band yesterday, just asking them before coming on here and said, what do you do between 14 and 18? That's actually quite a dire thing, you know. If you've got an interest in live music, what do you do? Well, we sneak into shows, or we go to bigger shows that are 14 plus, but the tickets can be 20 quid or whatever. So that is a real problem sustaining that crowd. And the third crowd that I want to talk about is under 14s, which we've really just started looking at, but we've had like matinee shows with some really young bands, and that's worked out really well, as well as just having like sort of pre-teen bands or whatever. You actually put on, you know, grown-up bands, and all the kids, friends, whatever, have a great time and dancing to sort of punky rock music or whatever. And of course, parents come and whatever like that, and it's actually quite a good afternoon out. So that's the that's the area I really quite like to develop in. Maybe I know Pippa's done a lot more on this than we have, but that's a way of developing people very young. But it's just that, I suppose, hopefully the panel will say more about that void of 14 to 18 and how to overcome that.
One of the problems with engaging with the kind of younger audience is obviously like licensing problems. So at my venue, the Cavern Club, we're not actually allowed to let people in unless they're 16, and for club nights they have to be 18. And as we heard on one of the earlier panels, most gigs are kind of underwritten by bar taking. So if you've got gigs on with a load of kids who are like 16, 17 years old, and you're not taking like hardly any money on the bar, you're relying on ticket money, there's almost always a kind of deficit. But there's only a deficit while those kids are that age. Once they get to 18, of course, you know, once you've kind of nurtured that audience and they've come into your venue and got into those bands and whatever scene that you're kind of pushing, obviously they're then the audience that you're totally relying on. So I think that's really important, you know, even though you're not making much money off teenagers when they first come to shows, you are kind of settling them into a scene and a community which they can be part of. And before long, they're the people who you're completely relying on. And actually, before long, they're the people who are in the bands and putting on shows and all of those kind of things. One of the important things that we try to do at the Cavern is engage people in participation as early as possible. So putting on bands that are really young, getting them to organise their own shows and promote their own shows, so they're making the posters, going out fly posting, DJing at the gig, all this kind of thing, so that they become part of the community of what you're doing, you know, and then they kind of come up through it and they start running the whole show before long. I mean, there's never really a problem getting kids to come to gigs. I think if you put on stuff that they like, if you put on bands that kids like, they're always going to want to be there. I mean, I'm sure that everyone in this room knows that when, you know, you can't wait to go to shows as soon as you're able to, as soon as you can, like, fake your ID and get in. You're doing it as soon as you can. So it's not that it's difficult to get the interest. It's just kind of managing and then kind of nurturing that interest so that it kind of blossoms, if you like, into a lifestyle for those people. Obviously, there are some demographics that it's easier to get engaged with than others. And as we all know, the live music scene and the music scene in general is pretty male-dominated in like places, especially in like punk rock scene, metal scene, etc. So one thing that we've got off the ground in Exeter is a thing called School of Frock, which is workshops specifically for girls to kind of come and learn instruments and form bands and just be in an environment which is completely female and do gigs around those events as well. And they've worked incredibly well for throwing up all-girl bands and also bringing those people in who felt a bit on the edges, bringing them more fully into the community at the Cavern and the live music scene in Exeter.
Do you work with the schools? Because that's what
it's not a school thing. It's just totally done at the venue.
Yeah, but we've just done a networking thing because none of the venues had any contact with any of the schools the head of music at the schools were using their own halls or using different places to do their, music, GCSE, live performance or whatever, and there was no connection between the schools and with the venues, and I found that really interesting because that's the kind of tapping in, and with the PTA committees and everything else, with all the enthusiastic parents, that's quite a
I'm like a grime DJ, and I haven't done any gigs ever under 18 or 14 to 18 plus. And what I found is it cuts off a lot of audience that are actually into the music. And then by the time they actually get to 18, they might not even be into it as much anymore. So you're kind of like cutting off the first kind of contact that they would have while they're listening to it and while they're growing with it. And then by the time they actually get to the age where they could go to gigs, they might not even end up going to the things that they grew up listening to, which is kind of strange. And I've just done a tour the last weeks, and you're seeing people at 18 going to their first shows and not being used to being in venues and the kind of treatment, how to move around, dealing with alcohol and drugs and all this kind of stuff. And it causes problems like at shows that I'm on. And I think so much training, with young people, if that was happening from when they were young, I would have encountered that when we come to do fresher shows in September every year. It's crazy.
So are you doing any work at the Lighthouse around the audience development?
I can't do it specifically at Lighthouse, but when I'm on the front line at gigs, and they even approach going to shows until they're 18, no way, because they're scared of like security, searches, costs, everything. There's like a big barrier for a lot of people like that, which doesn't really come up a lot. Like when you get to 18, things are $22.50, and like I remember like not being able to afford that kind of money. If that helps.
Charlotte?
For me, as a performer, I've tried to not let my age define what I can do. Obviously, it can do, but I started gigging when I was 14, which is obviously pretty young, and there was a lot of issues with that, like going into different places, and in Dundee there's very limited venues that I could perform in really, but I just kind of, with the help of my mum, we just kind of went online and sussed out some places I could go into, and that was just kind of the start of it. So I'd go to some venues, I would play, and then they'd obviously realise I'm clearly not over 18, and that would be an issue, and I wouldn't be allowed back, which I thought was a bit sad, but at the same open to kind of some venues that would let me do it. So I guess to 18, so much 18. I don't know why anymore. Kind of thing, a while to be honest. But I didn't want to let that put me off gigging, and I know it really can, and it is a bit of a scary environment, obviously. Yeah, I don't let that put me off. So yeah, I guess apart from the age thing, I wanted to offer a little bit of a Scottish perspective as well. And now I'm 20 and I'm kind of doing a lot of touring away from home and still in Scotland and all that. Coming back to teens venues because that's my music and that's who I want to play gigs to, but much opportunity for that, to be honest. So next week, for example, I just wrote it down so I remember, in Aberdeen I'm playing an over 14 show, which is great, and also in Aberdeen they do this thing called My First Gig, which is for 9 to 12 year olds actually, and basically you can go, I played it this year, and yeah, you go and they've got like face paint and stuff set up and lots of different things, but they've got a couple of acts playing, but they kind of set up in an environment that's a little bit like a school disco because that's obviously what they're used to. But it was really cool for me because I don't know, I felt even more pressure in a weird way performing to that age group because it was their first gig and their first introduction of being in that environment. So I wanted to make sure I was prepared with what I was doing and making sure I was saying the right things and kind of encouraging them to come back. And then for Dundee and Glasgow, there was only the options of doing over 18 shows, unfortunately, because, and mainly due to the cost. Obviously, like what you were both saying, is that like if you're going to put on a show during the week and it's over 14s, then they're obviously not going to make as much money as they would like to. And like I completely get that, obviously, but I think it's not about like moaning at the venues or moaning at the promoters, I guess, for that, because there's nothing they can do. Everyone wants to make money and stuff. They want to make profit, and artists would like to make money at some points as well. I think would be great. But for me, it's more about trying to put something in place that is going to encourage more people to come out to gigs, or make it more acceptable that there is over 14s gigs can happen, and it's less of a hassle for people to put them on or to even consider that. And so because of the tour situation in the UK, really, there isn't a network of venues really that you can do and say they're all over 14s and everyone's welcome. On a poster, you always have to put this certain one or this certain one, and it's obviously great for everyone. But what we've done this year is we're going to do a schools tour in the UK, which I'm working with help musicians on that. So I did a pledge music campaign for an EP, but also it was kind of, when people pledged, I was getting them to nominate a school of their choice. So it could be a primary school or secondary school. And we've had quite a lot of nominations, mostly in Scotland, but some in England as well. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do, because I think it's important to kind of, instead of just try to get people along, I guess, when they are nearly 18, going to see them and going to give them a show and hopefully explain some of the stuff that can happen at a gig. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm working on, and I'd like to hopefully keep that going for a longer time, to just like what you were saying about schools, because obviously that's where people are, that's where they feel comfortable, that's where they learn, but also introduce an actual gig environment into music lessons, and I think it would be a bit better.
We'll come back to schools, I think, in a minute, because that touring example is an interesting, that there is a potential where schools will become the new venue if the music's going into the schools, and so it's, we'll carry on talking about this, about how we make sure that the music venue remains the venue by overcoming obstacles. But my experience is vital in terms of fan development and getting a really strong fan base who are all accessing the music and videos through YouTube and streaming. They've grown up with streaming. It's now the norm. So how do you tap into them as early as possible on a live setting?
Well, I think once you go out of London, beyond the major cities, you are kind of restricted in terms of where you can go because of the 18 plus rules and regulations. And quite a few of my artists always come to me, and one in particular I'm thinking of right now is always, this venue should be 14 plus, this should be 14 plus. You go, and a large percentage of their audience is maybe older in some cases, some of them they're right, but I think the restrictions that are placed on licensing and on the actual cost element for a bar to open and have to run does make it difficult for a young artist to go out and play to these people. But if there's ways around it, like touring in schools and things like that, I'm sure all agencies, if it's a viable option, will support it. And we have to sell it into our artists, the benefit of doing it. But the long-term benefit is you get an early fan base that will be engaged, and the ability to go out and gain more streams and sell merch and eventually sell tickets if there is no venues that are below that.
And tapping into the sort of parent fan base as well, because the young voices, we participate, all the kids go to the O2 Arena, sing the songs, and the whole place, it's the parents that are buying the tickets, buying the T-shirts, buying the DVD, going, that there's a huge sort of enthusiasm amongst the parents and the grandparents, actually. You've got several generations who've grown up with music and are... it runs deep.
It's a great experience.
Yeah.
Sing along. You lose 2-3 hours. You can just let loose and have fun.
Yeah.
So it's like the more exposure you give to people earlier on, the better. It's just working out with the restrictions in place on the venues, restrictions in place on the agents of booking the shows in. How do we work around that so that we can get to those kids, and our artists can get to them as well, and grow the fan bases? It's just however we can do it. Like, I'm pretty certain every major agency, every artist, will be supportive of it, and find ways we can do it.
So Philip, you're 100% focused on sort of youth development.
We work exclusively with young people from the age of 0 to 25. And we ask them a lot about what their wants and needs are. And what consistently comes back when you ask them the question, what is the biggest barrier to you making music? Is a space in which to make it. Out of that spurned the Rehearsal Spaces project back in 2011. About £100,000 came out of DCMS and went through UK Music. And we project managed that. And actually, that was a capital project. But what I always think, looking back on that project, is it never linked up with the venues. It got as far as the youth clubs, and then it didn't engage with the wider community. And I liked what was said this morning about the idea of, venues being part of a community and that community engagement. And I think that's a fantastic thing to do. But to do it properly requires actually quite complex partnerships. And we're based in Rich Mix. I'll give you a couple of examples of projects which I think have really got off the ground. We helped them set up a young ambassadors scheme. Now, Rich Mix is a multiple venue, but the music is really important to them, especially the work around world music and spoken word. And it's actually the spoken word bit that the young people have latched on to. And through that, then they just started to develop a week of takeovers. So it was young people as producers and programmers. These were under 18-year-olds. So they gave the venue to young people for a week. That came out of that. And that really started to produce some really interesting things. And Eddie Berg, the new chief executive of Rich Mix, is a very good thing. And he gives away thousands of hours a year of free rehearsal space, not just to young people, but to dance companies, to other organizations. Suddenly builds up a real community of practice around that. And then Music for Youth contacted them. You haven't come across them. They've now started a new program called Frequencies, just traveling around the country. Last year it was in Glasgow, Liverpool, and it was in London. And that's giving young bands platforms, a little bit of workshop and industry support. Now, the link between Rich Mix and Music for Youth, the link between Rich Mix and its local community has really started to develop something very interesting around that. And that started with very little money, but it enabled them to then apply for money to youth music. Now, a lot of venues are doing this already, but you can get paid for it. You can get money out of this, as long as you can package that partnership in a certain way. A really good example, another good example that I think of is when you look at the work that's going on at Band on the Wall with an organisation called Brighter Sound. Now, again, Brighter Sound are youth music funded specifically to support children and young people in challenging circumstances. It's good that they're in the same building. That immediately gives a synchronicity around what they're doing. But across the country, your point about are you engaging with schools? Across the country, there's 121 music education hubs. It's their role to engage young people within music within that community. I doubt whether any of them are engaging with venues within that.
No, I've had
there may be some, but
I've had this exact situation, and that there's like a really a missing link in terms of hooking up the local schools. I had a meeting with Head of Music that they take their classes and they go and do their live performance setting in the church hall or the village hall or town hall or whatever it is. Like, oh my God, why are you not doing this in the music venue?
Well, I think it may be that you need to go through another organisation to do that. So if you're in Brighton, you go and talk to Rhythmics. If you're in Norwich, you go and talk to the Garage. These are conduits or ways to get through, to navigate your way through that, which are, difficult. I work in London. I got to deal with 30 music education hubs. It's a pain in the arse, but it's hard work. But we actually do get some payoff through that. So, I think there are ways to do it. And I
but
really
as a
do
venue,
believe that there's money
don't you
there.
just contact the head of music?
I
Like
think
if
you
you're
can-
in terms of like practical solutions, if you've got a music venue, Google the school, find out who the head of music is, go and have a coffee.
I think that's a practical way forward. I think you need to understand. For me, it's maybe understanding where the need is. Maybe some schools are what we would call super served. They always get projects. I remember one time, walking through to my project at the end, and I went through the Royal Ballet, and then through the Royal Opera House, and then to find what we were doing. That didn't need work. So maybe, and the role of hubs, in a sense, is to identify where that need is. But actually, geographic is good. Draw a circle a mile around where your venue is, or where and then look at what that might look like. So I think there's loads of potential within this. And it's I'm coming from the idea of where you can get young people really involved in programming around that? Because I think that's really exciting, because you're actually building your base from that.
Yeah, and coming up, I was in my first band when I was 14. We rehearsed in the local venue in the afternoon and at weekends because they let us do that, and then that became our kind of youth club. That was our base, but that was back in the day. That was back in the 1970s, before there were any rules. So we're going to throw this out to the audience in a minute. So I think we've got some, or did I take all the microphones in the end? Maybe we did, but yeah. I mean, what are so for the venue owners here, or the venue managers? What are there sort of practical solutions in terms of problematic laws and legislation that are a real barrier to this?
Well, it depends on the venue, because there's a rule that if the bar is in the same room as where the stage is, then the whole venue has to be over 16 or over 18 or whatever your license is. But if you've got, so in Exeter, for example, the Cavern is one room. So that's why we have a strict rule that has to be 16 plus. But just round the corner, the Phoenix, their bar is in a separate room to the auditorium. So any age can go to gigs in that place. So it partly depends, doesn't it, Tim, on the actual layout of the venue as to what you can legally do and not do. I mean, we've got around that sometimes we've done all ages shows that we've booked, but put them in the Phoenix because you can get any age in there, But we can't really do that in the Cavern. If the bar's open, you can shut the bar and do it, but then obviously you're not taking any money to cover the costs of the event. Yeah. So it depends a little bit on what your room is actually made up like.
Yep.
That is it. Full stop. Okay. Do we have any? Yes, we do.
Hello, I'm Dom from the Boiler Room. I was just going to say, we applied for a minor variation on our licence, so we can have all age gigs. And we're in bar and venue stages in exactly the same room. So I don't think it's actually a legal requirement. I think it's more, it depends on the licensing authority.
What's the process of that then, if you were a venue?
So applying for a minor variation on your premises licence means that you want to change something, but you do have to notify the paper, you have to notify all the local, like environmental health. So people can basically put objections in if they want to. But I was just going to say, with us, we do everything from like next week we've got Boogie Monsters, which is a toddler rave happening at the venue. And then we do like a youth music program as well. And we have like a children's charter. So we say to parents, if you're bringing your kids in, don't get pissed and expect us to look after your kids. There's like, we're very responsible and clear and dynamic with how we expect people to behave as well, under 18s, when they're in the venue. We're like, if you're going to get really drunk and then come to the venue, you're not only putting the venue at risk, you're also putting yourselves at risk. So we say stuff like, we have to have parents present, or we have to have, if it's a school and it's 17 plus, or 16, 17, we have to have teachers present. Because the teachers are actually better than our security could ever do. Yeah. Because if a teacher's telling a student or a young person, stop doing that, they will immediately stop it. With our security, we get all sorts of backlash from youngsters between the age of 14 of things like, oh yeah, my dad could buy this venue, and you're just like, well, because we're from Guildford in Surrey, and do you know what I mean? So I've been called some wonderful things over the years when we do events with colleges and freshers events and stuff. But I just wanted to say, it's a really big part of what the Boiler Room does. We do all ages shows all the time, unless we do a risk assessment and we feel like actually the show, isn't going to be appropriate. But then if a parent rings up and says, I want to bring Jimmy along, he's only 16 and really want to see this band, we say, that's fine, as long as you're going to look after him when, we've got the barriers up and it's going to be a busy night. Yeah. So I would definitely say to any venue, just, get the processes in place and then, be open to everyone. Yeah. We all got to make money, right?
Yeah. I agree.
Sorry, I felt like it was a bit of a speech. Sorry.
No, not at all. But it's back to becoming that community hub. And actually, last Venues Day and the Venues Day before that, I was on panels where I was saying the community hub, becoming the community hub, that opens up so many opportunities. And the younger age groups, a friend of mine is a DJ, and they've got their son who's 11. He's going to do a Halloween disco, so they're doing it in a local music venue, and they sold out immediately. They put the tickets on Eventbrite. They sold out immediately because all the parents are like, "Oh yeah, that sounds fun. We can go to the venue." And so now they're actually doing they're having to do like a matinee show and another one after, because they got twice as many, and they sold that out straight away as well through the network, because there's just a network within the school. So, yeah. Is your dad a dance instructor, by the way? Yes. I was just on a cruise ship with him. Yes, and I was on there doing a review. It was quite a horrific experience, so I'll tell you later. No, it wasn't a horrific experience with your dad. It was just... generally, anyway, this is being streamed. Let's leave it there. That's a different Age Matters panel.
Hi, I'm over here.
Hi.
Hi, Emma from the Brook in Southampton. Just as a suggestion, we've started doing more gigs where we have been involving younger audiences. One of the things that we did was quite a good entry level was my daughter was leaving primary school this year, and so at the end of the year they were looking at something that wasn't a prom but was a bit different. So we charged a ticket price, and they came and we had a live band. The band actually got some of the children on stage so that they could sing along with them, and it worked really, really well. And we didn't lose money. It wasn't a profit maker, but a lot of the parents dropping them off hadn't seen the venue before. So, it was an entrance level into getting the parents involved, that sort of thing. So it worked really well. So some advice from us might be to speak to the schools about, maybe end of year things, something a bit different from a disco, step up from that, worked really well. And I mean, the other point that when you were saying about girls in particular, this is something we're looking into, and we were actually advised to speak to you, Charlotte, because I recently took my 2 young girls to a Little Mix concert, and that was their first gig, because we hadn't really started doing so much at the Brook in Southampton then. And the trouble for me is it's so highly sexualised. They're dressing, in tiny leotards, coming out to an audience that is mainly 8 to 14-year-olds and saying, "Are you feeling sexy?" And it just feels all wrong. And that's one of the reasons that we want to look into what we can do to inspire young girls to see that they can be in music, that they can be inspiring musicians, they can watch people that can inspire them, and realise it doesn't have to be about the way in which they look. And I think as music venue owners, this is something that we really need as a duty to kind of show them, give them some inspiration.
Yeah, and also that girls don't just have to be there as consumers, or there because their boyfriend's band is playing or whatever, but that they're actually the people who are on the stage and putting the gigs on and all of that kind of thing as well. So a lot of girls we get into the club, they'll come in, they kind of watch the band, they do the kind of, be kind of like fans of the band. They're brilliant at being fans, and then they kind of disappear. And then when they get to a certain age, there's not much left in it for them, because they're only so invested in what they've been watching.
Absolutely.
They haven't actually participated at all as anything other than consuming what's being, thrown at them.
We're a musical household, and I turn on the telly, and the majority of videos containing female artists, it is all about the way in which they look. There's not many, there are some, but there aren't many artists that you can turn and really, really be inspired as a young girl as to the pure talent that they are. And more gigs that we can get them to early enough and really inspire them, I think is a great, great thing.
Talking about go on, Philip.
We're working with an organisation at the moment who are fantastic called Girls Rock London. And again, they're doing a lot of work around mentoring young female musicians, and actually over a year period, encouraging them and giving them performance platforms and positive action within that, which I'm a great supporter of, is really, really paying off. And there are a number of organisations like that, but it's a real key area within this, and I think that directly needs addressing. So.
So, but looking at the different sort of transition through teenage years in particular, is there an opportunity? Because a lot of the things that I've seen recently that are doing really well are the parents go along and the kids. It's a natural thing. The kids are at that age where they do, the parents go with them. That's easy. Then, as they get older, it's not cool to have your parents hanging out with you. And so then there's that problem of, that sort of older teenage era where that you could potentially lose them, even though you've won them earlier on.
Yeah, but saying that, most people, when they first start going to gigs, the last thing you want is your parents being there. And actually, in my experience, when people's parents are there, they're the people who cause the problems a lot of the time. Yeah, absolutely. Or, if anyone's going to be complaining, it's people's parents. The kids are just happy to be at the gig. They're completely mortified that their parents are even there. And and are kind of looking forward to the time when, and in a way I see and not every venue isn't the same, and we're all doing all sorts of different things to stay open. But when we've got a bit of a punk rock ethos, and really we're kind of almost there for people to carve out their own identity, and you want to kind of get away from your school teachers, and you want to get away from your parents and find, just be there with your mates and with your band and seeing what you're interested in, and you're kind of striking out on your own a bit, Yeah.
Any other few final... Oh, there's quite a few. I don't know where the microphones are, though.
I've got one. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. And Biffy Clyro did over 14 shows, and really from an early stage they insisted on it, as far as I know. The other one is Julie Weir from Music for Nations now was putting on gigs for teenagers and even younger, I think at the Electric Ballroom. So if you have contacts to either of those, it's worth asking how they did it. Where I live in Edinburgh, there's actually, when we take on a venue, or we go to a venue, we always ask if we can have over 14s in the gigs, because I was lucky enough to grow up with that, and it meant that my mum took me to my first concert at 11, and by 14 I was telling her, please not come with me at gigs, and so it meant...
When you're promoting to that age group, how are you reaching them?
We don't promote to that age group. We just say, if you're over 14, you can come to a Born to Be Wide evening. I mean, we're mainly running speaking events, but you can come there and be there till 10 o'clock. And actually, legally, the venues that we've had, their license would allow them till midnight, but it's a thing where, they'll until 10 o'clock they're comfortable with it, and after that it becomes problematic. So sometimes I know venues don't publicise it, but they can do it, and it's just a sort of discretionary thing.
Thanks. At the back there?
Yeah, my name's Joe from Liverpool. What it was, like a lot of the guys on stage, you all started in bands when you were younger. When I was about 14, I was a little goth, and a big bunch of us used to hang out in town. And I couldn't even tell you how we ended up, but we ended up being a youth division within the Tate Gallery in Liverpool. And as the workshops that we were running for the young people, our peers, were getting really successful, an article had come out, published by the Merseyside Police, saying that the crime rates within the demographic of, I think it was 12 to 18-year-olds in the alternative community were just exploding. So there was a lot of trouble in town. So the Tate, off their own back, approached Merseyside Police and said, well, we've got this bunch of young kids who are in the middle of this community. They've actually got some ideas of what we could do to get them off the streets, getting pissed in the middle of town and into a venue. So, a series of meetings happened, and we ended up being given a local venue. And the police and the Tate helped to subsidise the venue. So helping to subsidise the cost for the security, for the door staff, for the sound tech, for the actual opening of the venue. And now, as helping to run a couple of venues, I'm wanting to do something very similar to what I did 15 years ago. Without the support of what we had back then, we wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as what we were. So the question is there anything there for venues to be subsidised to help what is grassroots fan base? Because we're talking about grassroots music, but what about the people that are ultimately going to earn earn bands money? Is there anything that is there available for us?
Has anyone been able to tap into any funding for this audience?
No, but that's a very good idea, really, because the only cost that our venue would be closed during the day, even at weekends, and it's just like the cost of paying people. If somebody come with that, they're gonna, it'd be great to be able to do that, but it's just that would all mount up, wages or whatever, stuff, and if there's something just to cover that, then the venue's free,
Yeah, well, we were really fortunate in the fact that we had, a massive national organisation who was heavily involved in the arts, who very luckily, got involved with a group of goths and thought, let's put on some metal shows and get these kids off the streets. But unfortunately, there's not anything there, as you say.
See, going back to the music hubs, so there is funding for that, but we're in the region that I was just doing some work. They're using the funding to getting the kids together and doing the events and putting bands together and rehearsals, but it's in a different venue. It's not in any of the music venues. It's in the local music venues, which is why we've just introduced them. So why are you doing that? And so that there is money in each region. There's a music hub. I was waiting for someone to speak out about music hubs there, or the Arts Council. But
I'd like.
Do you want to? Is the other microphone?
Should I say something before? No.
Go for it. That's
okay.
Just
Yes.
on its way.
Mark, those people who were here before lunch. The Arts Council is failing to understand how to fund music in general, whether it's subsidising grassroots music venues, whatever else needs funding, and how a separate organisation the money needs to be hived off away from the Arts Council, and perhaps music needs to be looked after as a separate thing. As music hubs are being looked at very shortly, I believe, the next couple of years, to see whether they are fit for purpose. And I think what we're seeing here is there isn't any joined up thinking between music hubs and the education world in which they work and the world in which most of us live and work, in terms of what's loosely called commercial music, even though we all know it's not commercial because we're not making lots of money. But I think if there was a separate organisation funding both music hubs and the grassroots music venues and the places where funding is required, that joined up thinking would have to start happening. And I think that would be an incredibly exciting space in which to help everything that we're doing actually flourish.
Totally agree. Final
Hi.
question over there.
So my name's Huey. I used to run a music venue myself, but I also work at the Arts Council. Yeah, some hubs. One. And get live. Previous from the accessible. You could apply yourselves to do something like that, and to get some of the aspects that the Arts Council will fund are things about audience development, and so exactly what this is all about. And using your venues in the times when it's not being used for other stuff to get young people engaged and involved. There's definitely money available through grants for the arts for that, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about that.
Did everyone get that down in writing?
I can even give you my
It's
email
recorded.
address.
All right, well, ending on a very pleasing note of hearing that the Arts Council has funding for you all. All right, so thank you to the panel, and thank you to everyone. If you've got any more questions, then we'll be hanging around for a minute, I'm sure. Thank you very much.